Welcome back to Bible Bowl study time, if you want to call it that, in Second Kings chapter 12 now. And it starts out, again, we'll just jump right into it. It starts out in verse 1. In the seventh year of Jehu, Joash began to reign. So in the seventh year of Jehu's reign, Joash began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. And then it goes on, it says his mother's name was Zebiah of Beersheba. So we're kind of setting up the story here that Joash reigned 40 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zebiah of Beersheba.
So we see in verse 2 that Jehoash did what was right in the sight of the Lord. We've seen a lot of kings that they did evil in the sight of the Lord. But he did good. And why? Because Jehoiada, the priest, had instructed him to do good.
And then it goes on in verse number 3, it says, nevertheless, the high places were not taken away, and the people continued to sacrifice and make their offerings on the high places.
So a little clarification, these would be places up in the mountains, only literally high places or up in buildings that people would take, do sacrifices to false gods and things of that nature. So verse 4, we continue on. Jehoash said to the priest, all the money of the holy things that is brought into the house of the Lord, this money for which each man is assessed, the money from the assessment of persons and the money that a man's heart prompts to bring to the house of the Lord. He said, let the priest take from his donor and let them repair the house whenever there are repairs needed, which makes good business sense to me.
Yeah. And then in verse 6, it says, by the 23rd year of King Joash, the priest had made no repairs to the house. So, we'd gone 23 years and there had been no repairs on this house.
So what did King Jehoash do? Well, he summoned Jehoiada.
These are some hard words.
They are some tough names. And a lot of them start with J and A, and it's going to get confusing. But therefore, in verse 7, King Jehoash summoned Jehoiada the priest and the other priests and said, why aren't you repairing this? We've already told you that we want to take some of the monies that are given to the temple, the offerings, and we want to make sure that the temple is getting repaired accordingly where it needs. He said, don't take any more money from donors, but hand it over for the repair of the house. So stop taking up a contribution, and the money that you have, we need to fix this place.
So the priests agreed. In verse 8, it says the priests agreed that they should take no more money from the people and that they should not repair the house.
So what we find in verse 9 is a little funny. So Jehoiada, they weren't going to take any more money. The Jehoiada took a chest, so think of a treasure chest, and he shut it up, and at the top of it, he put a hole in it. He drilled a hole in it, and he set it right beside the altar outside of the house of the Lord. And the priest who guarded the threshold put in it all the money that was brought to the house of the Lord.
And in verse 10, whenever they saw that there was much money in the chest, so they looked in it and they saw there's a lot of money in the chest, the king's secretary and the high priest, so that just kind of makes sense that the king's secretary and the high priest were together to come together and bag and counted the money that was found in the house of the Lord. So those two men came, the secretary and the high priest came, counted the money, and they put it all into bags.
So they took that money we see in verse 11, and all that money was weighed out to the hands of workmen, who had oversight of the repair of the temple. And they paid it out to the carpenters and the builders who worked on the house of the Lord. We must have a visitor. We're going to continue on while Andy grabs the door. And not only did they give it to the carpenters and the builders and everything, but also to the masons and the stone cutters, as well as to buy the materials like timber and the quarried stone to make repairs on the house of the Lord and for any outlay for the repairs of the house. So they took all that money that was put into the chest, and they paid for the materials and paid for the workers that were going to repair the temple. So verse 13, but there was not made for the house of the Lord any basins of silver or snuffers or bowls or trumpets, all these things none of that was made from the money that was brought into the house of the Lord. And for all of the thing was given to the people that were repairing that, as we see in verse 14. Sorry, Reagan and Hadley just walked in, so that's why we're a little distracted. So in verse 14, we see, like I just said, all of the money was given to the workmen. So there was no money left over to make the bronze things and the utensils and all of that stuff.
So we roll into verse 15, and what's kind of odd here in verse 15, that they did not ask for an accounting from the men into who they had delivered the money to pay the workmen, for they dealt honestly. So that's saying a lot for those men. They didn't even ask for an accounting from these men.
And that's probably not too advised in today's business world.
Right.
You need to keep good books.
Yeah.
You need to get a good accountant.
Make sure everybody knows what's going on. So in verse 16, the money from the gift offerings and the money from the sin offerings was not brought into the house of the Lord. It belonged to the priests.
So at the time, Hazael, the king of Syria, we talked about him here a while back, they went up and fought against Gath, and they took it. They were victorious in that. But when Hazael set his face to go up against Jerusalem, Jehoash, the king of Judah, he took all those sacred gifts that Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and Ahaziah, his fathers, the kings of Judah, had dedicated, and his own sacred gifts, and all the gold that was found. So he took all these expensive things that were found in the house of the Lord, and he sent those to Hazael, the king of Syria.
Okay, so now we roll into verse 19.
But before we do that, Hazael took those gifts, and he went away from Jerusalem. He took that as a gift of peace, I guess you could say.
So verse 19, and it asks the questions. Now, the rest of the acts of Joash and all that he did, it says, are they not found in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And that was basically the question that was asked there.
So in verse 20, we find that his servants arose and made a conspiracy and struck down Joash in the house of Milo on the way that goes down to Silla. It was Jozachar, the son of Shemeath, and Jehozabad, the son of Shomer, his servants, who struck him down so that he died. And they buried him there with his fathers in the city of David. And Amaziah, his son, took his place. So that is the rest of chapter 12. Sorry about the distractions we had as we went through. Hopefully you can take from the information on that. And we will see you for chapter 13.